Massachusetts, late 1940s. A cold morning settles over the sprawling brick buildings of the Fernald State School, its windows fogged from the winter air. Inside, a young boy walks down a dim hallway, the echo of his shoes swallowed by concrete walls. The smell of disinfectant lingers, sharp, sterile, inescapable. He believes he's heading to a harmless science club. Instead, he is walking into a government-funded experiment, one that will feed radioactive oatmeal to children who never gave consent. And for nearly 40 years, no one outside these walls would know. How did a school entrusted with protecting vulnerable children become the site of one of America's darkest hidden experiments? The Fernald State School was meant to be a place of care, a state-run institution housing boys, many of whom had intellectual disabilities. Yet, beneath its orderly routines, another agenda was unfolding. In the 1940s and 50s, the school became the quiet host to covert nutrition experiments backed by government funding. Staff at Fernald recruited children into what they called a science club, presenting it as a special opportunity, unaware that the true purpose was to track how their bodies absorbed radiation. For these boys, the club felt like a privilege, a rare moment of attention in an otherwise regimented institutional life. But nothing about it was what it seemed. The school's reputation as a protective institution gave the experiment cover, the kind of trust that makes wrongdoing almost invisible. The experiment began quietly. Each morning, selected boys from the so-called science club were handed bowls of oatmeal, the same warm, familiar breakfast they had eaten countless times before. What they didn't know was that this oatmeal had been laced with radioactive substances. The purpose wasn't nutrition, it was absorption. Their bodies were being used to measure how radiation moved through human tissue. Staff monitored the boys carefully, tracking changes, recording data. But none of the children were ever told the truth. There was no consent, no explanation, only compliance expected from a population conditioned to follow orders. The first signs of something wrong weren't loud or dramatic. They were quiet, the secrecy, the supervision, the lack of transparency. Even within the walls of Fernald, very few understood what these experiments truly were. And then came the moment of no return. Once radioactive substances entered the boys' bodies, nothing could undo it. Their participation was irreversible and still completely unknown to them. The experiment continued, day after day, with no questions asked, because the children had never been told there was anything to question at all. For decades, nothing about the experiment surfaced. The boys grew older, the staff changed, and the memories of the science club faded into the background of institutional life. What happened inside Fernald remained locked behind walls, and inside archives, no one was allowed to see him. It wasn't until the 1990s, nearly 40 years later, that the truth finally emerged. Declassified documents began revealing a disturbing reality. The club had been a front for government-funded research involving radioactive food. Survivors came forward with their stories, describing how they had been monitored after eating the oatmeal. Never told what was being measured, never informed that radioactive substances had entered their bodies. Investigators pieced together the truth. The experiments were never disclosed, never consensual, and disguised deliberately behind the harmless label of a science club. The revelations were shocking. What had once been viewed as a state institution dedicated to care and education had, in reality, played a role in one of the most chilling betrayals in American medical history. And for the first time, the public understood what had happened. Not through confession, but through uncovered evidence that had remained hidden for nearly half a century. When the truth finally came to light, the reaction was swift and horrified. What had been dismissed for decades as a harmless school club was now exposed as a covert experiment on children, many of whom never understood what had been done to them. The immediate consequence was a reckoning, not just for Fernald, but for the public institutions that had quietly supported the program. The revelation forced the nation to confront a painful reality: that vulnerable children had been used as test subjects without knowledge or consent. In the long term, the case helped reshape conversations about ethical oversight in human experimentation. It stood as a stark reminder that even government-backed programs could overstep moral boundaries when shielded from scrutiny. Justice, however, was complicated. The source does not detail punishments, lawsuits, or formal accountability, and so the public was left to grapple with a sense of unresolved betrayal. What remained clear was this: the damage could not be undone. The children had grown into adults, carrying the weight of a secret they never agreed to be part of. Today, the story of the Fernald experiments stands as a haunting reminder of what happens when trust is exploited behind closed doors. A school meant to protect children instead became the setting for one of the darkest hidden chapters in American medical history. The lessons remain painfully relevant. Institutions still hold immense power over vulnerable populations, and secrecy can allow wrongdoing to thrive unnoticed for decades. And so the question lingers: if this could happen at a school for children, how many other truths remain buried beneath files, locked rooms, and forgotten testimonies?